DNA of Collaboration. We'd like to thank Aurora WDC for hosting our webinar. And before we start, I'd like to cover a few things. For those of you on the phone, your lines will be muted. Please ask questions in the Q&A window, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. The slides and a recorded presentation will be available and posted on the SLA website after the webinar. And please also feel free to use social media. Our hashtag is hashtag SLACID, and Chris's handle is at SourcePOV, SOURCEPOV, as in point of view. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Chris Jones is an author and technology consultant with a 30-year investment in developing engaged, productive teams. Having played leadership roles in technology, business, and public venues, Chris has developed a strong and consistent voice that is helping shape new collaborative practices. He is working on a second book offering new guidance for achieving more flexibility within and across collaborative teams. Chris?
Well, gosh, Marsh, thanks so much. I appreciate you guys having me today. Apologize, the screen might not be displaying fully. I do see a full screen on my display. If you can't see the full screen, we'll definitely make these slides available afterwards. And apologies for the technical glitch there. I think it might be Windows 8, and can't do much about it at this stage. Are we good to go, Marsh? Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, super. Well, first off, I want to thank both the Special Library Association, Competitive Intelligence Division, SLACID, as well as Aurora for hosting the event today. I appreciate you guys having me. I believe the participants are mostly from the library sciences domain, competitive intelligence, certainly some KM folks in the group, definitely some focus on innovation. If we've left anybody else out who would like to weigh in with another group or another domain reference there, just to make sure we're covering the bases, please maybe shoot a text message to Mars so we can include folks in that frame. I find it's very important to make sure we understand who's at the table, make sure we have a good picture of the audience, and make sure everybody's objectives are covered. In terms of the official objectives for today, and what we teed up in the learning objectives, we definitely want to talk about key trends in intellectual property. We want to talk about knowledge management, where that is, where it's headed. We're going to talk quite a bit about collaboration because that's certainly a common theme at work here. And we're going to end up with a discussion of solution language, which in my view is a way to kind of weave all these pieces together. So I really feel like it's going to be a great discussion. I, for one, am very much opposed to talking heads, so I'm going to work hard to minimize my comments. I think I can squeeze those down to about 40 minutes or so. We want to have lots and lots of time for discussion at the end, because if I'm doing the job right here, I want to get a lot of ideas going, stimulate some new thinking, challenge some preconceived notions, and if we do this right, there should be quite a bit of feedback and commentary. As Mars said, I am online at SourcePOV. Actually, I referenced a couple of hashtags early on. Go ahead back to the title slide there. IP30 is a good one for today if you guys would like to use that. Marge had mentioned SLACID, some other ones listed there that might be useful. But again, we'll jump in, and if everybody can hear okay, we'll go ahead and get started. In terms of agenda, we'll spend just a couple minutes on defining terms. I've also found that making sure we're all on the same page early is critically important. We're going to attack the value of good ideas in a couple of pieces. We're going to talk about the evolution of ideas, evolution of markets, tap a little bit of Michael Porter, talk about IP 3.0 from a building block perspective in terms of what are the elements for a collaborative knowledge economy. So we'll delve into some components there. And as I said, we'll end up with some discussion around solution language as well as KM. The whole last 20 minutes, we want to definitely allocate time for Q&A, some discussion around some of the ideas that came out today, also a couple of resources. So that's kind of a picture for the next hour, and hopefully you guys are happy with the material as advertised. That's what we're going to jump into. Okay. One last thing in terms of background, there is a blog post out there. When you guys get a copy of this deck or the PDF, this link will be active. This is essentially a frame for today. One thing that I will advocate later in the deck, but also anytime you talk to me, is the notion that to really have a good sense of the background framing, it's really helpful to understand the context of the conversation. The quote here for me, good ideas, the fabric of creativity and innovation. I always try to put some kind of wrapper around our scope and our context just so we can try to get on that same page and stay there. So you can see a couple references here to IP Jefferson, that's Thomas Jefferson, Stephen B. Johnson. We'll be covering all this material as we go forward, but that blog is out there for reference. If you're in Twitter at all, you'll have seen references to this as we've come up to today. So just a little bit more of a background frame. Okay, let's talk about terminology. I want to make sure that we all come from the same place. And again, I am not an attorney. I'm certainly not an IP attorney. I have at one point along the way hired an attorney to explain all this to me. So this is in no way legal advice, full disclaimer here. But intellectual property is essentially a legal framework that's about assigning ownership rights for content. Competitive intelligence, of course, as many as you on the call know, is a research discipline that essentially looks at relevant ideas in the marketplace and as a means to establish stakeholder value. And the knowledge management, as some folks know, and I'm not sure if everybody here has a background in knowledge management, but it's a business discipline that really does look at some of the same kind of elements. And what I find interesting is that you kind of link together this notion that ideas can show up in a legal context, in a research context, but also in just a day-to-day business context. And I find that is a pretty fascinating way to think about this, because so often we get into a certain frame or a certain perspective or point of view, and right off the bat we start to limit what we're talking about. And you guys will find that I quote Ludwig Wittgenstein quite a bit along the way. He's an Austrian philosopher earlier in the 20th century, and he's made a comment, you can see the quote there, that language does really constrain our view of the world, and you can flip that around and say, well, guess what? Language can also define the solution. That's where this concept of solution language comes from. So we'll come back to that point a bit later, but I wanted to get some of these key terms kind of introduced right up front. For the visual learners in the call, so I include myself on that list. I've always got to have a picture too, and this started out as a taxonomy of collaboration or taxonomy of ideas. What you'll see here is a set of definitions that kind of link together the notion of insights, which are essentially random observations that generally lack context, and you can see these any day you decide to surf on the internet. And as these evolve into more specific context, we might spark an idea that lends itself to the creative process. So we begin to look at how some of those insights might apply to solve a problem of some sort. And if we are especially fortunate and perhaps skilled, we can turn those ideas into designs for solutions until we ultimately come up with an invention of some sort or a solution to a problem. So this picture essentially is a visual way to get at what we just talked about a few minutes ago. But as we get into IP and its various stages of evolution, the thought process here would be is that there are relationships between insights, ideas, designs, and inventions that are important. So we'll come back to this picture and do a couple updates to it as we go, but I always think it's helpful to have kind of a visual rendition of what we're talking about if it's relevant. Okay, so now we're going to talk about evolutionary forces and kind of take the notion of IP through its evolution. From the research I've done, intellectual property started out as patents, land patents, way back in the 16th, 17th century. John Locke had a lot to do with this. Not everybody knows that intellectual property actually is part of the Constitution. Congress is empowered to establish laws for this thing, and it's been out there for, as you can see, a couple centuries. It wasn't always popular, though. Thomas Jefferson talked about ideas as being more like light or fire. He used a metaphor of a candle. He who lights his taper at mine receives light without darkening me. And actually Jefferson, with his, I guess, perhaps a little more libertarian views, perhaps, was really very much about let's not restrict or exclude the exchange of ideas or knowledge, because it really is much more of a natural inclination of human interaction to exchange ideas and to benefit from that. So the notion that IP has been around for a very long time is true, but it hasn't always been popular. So that's kind of a way to frame that. In terms of IP in practice, we talk about intellectual property, and again, I am by no means an attorney, so this is just kind of based on research and my understanding. The major ones that show up in the commercial context are typically around patents, which are granted for exclusive right to use a design, very, very heavily used in the manufacturing pharma space. Copyright, which is much more the domain of authors and artists. Trademark, which tend to go with corporate brands in the marketing space. And of course, trade secrets are protected, for corporations across the board. Where I'm focusing today and where I'd like to kind of take our discussion is that first line around patents. The idea there is, are we perhaps stranding our best ideas? So, certainly IP is not a bad thing, and I'm in no way saying we should move away from it or suspend it or get rid of it. But in a knowledge economy and in a world where insights and information are flowing much more quickly, what I'm trying to challenge here is by locking away and putting patents on our best ideas, is that going to cover us for the long term in terms of innovation and what we want to do with progress in general? So let's look at our picture again. We'll circle back to that diagram before. You'll see the same boxes, and what I've done here is I've highlighted the design component, because to me that maps on pretty nicely to our patent concept that we just introduced, and also the copyright, which is really your final finished product, which is linked into dollars. So you can see here that the tangible value varies depending on what stage in the process we're talking about. But what's important to me here is that ideas are often kind of attached to designs. Generally speaking, lockdown is as best as a company can. This is done through internal policy. This is done through firewalls. There's a number of things companies do to keep their good ideas inside the brick walls, if you will. But insights are generally ignored, and those are elements of the process that we established earlier that really are not tracked and not really part of the equation. So ideas as property has got a long history, but the fact is, going forward, I really want us to challenge how might we rethink that. Okay? If you bring the whole thing forward to the last 15 years or so, what you'll see is, and maybe you know quite well, is the notion of Creative Commons. I call it here the Commons era, or more the intent to share, which really challenges the notion of intellectual property in a pretty fundamental way by saying, maybe it's okay to share ideas. Maybe it's okay to put content, out in the public space for people to access. You see here quite a few examples ranging from the Creative Commons itself, which is around, licensing to share, through social networks, through the software industry, where there's been a huge investment in open source technology, and that's been going for a couple decades now, so that's very well established. And even in the areas of medical research, where IP and patents can be very important, there's also been some huge inroads around sharing of research results and data in the Human Genome Project. So a lot happening in the space. You'll find that there are still quite a few loose ends. A lot of folks challenging the approach here, challenging how it works, challenging the governance and the support models. But at the end of the day, again, everybody has a different view. My take is, hey, this is a step in a good direction. We're starting to look at what sharing can mean in the open market. Okay, so let's go back to our picture again, and where are we focused? So my take, based on the same illustration of designs and ideas, we're much more looking upstream now. We're looking at the ideas, again, design, because really with the commons you have to license something. You have to share something. Ideas are often fairly nebulous. They're often very abstract. But at the end of the day, those designs are linked back to their source ideas. So we're starting down the path of what can we share and how can we share. But again, those upstream insights are still, for the most part, ignored. So let's come forward to the IP 3.0, the possibilities, which we could link to collaboration, or we could just kind of keep it open-ended. But I'd like to touch on a couple of thoughts that really challenge the premise of both, IP as property and also IP as opportunity for sharing. So let's just step through some things that I see as happening in the market today to really understand where some of this might go. Number one is market integration. Essentially, we're redefining the commercial space, how competition works. Some segments require it, so we won't touch certain spaces, but as we look at smaller companies, much more of the individually directed activities, if you look at the open market, the global market, the highly connected market, the integration starts to increase. We start to see more and more players interacting than perhaps they did in the past. Number two, partnerships, consortiums, ecosystems of stakeholders. Certainly open software is a part of that. Human Genome is an example of that, where you start to see groups, very large groups that might seem competitive on the surface, starting to work together much more closely. Commons era is successful. We talked about the fact that it's stabilizing, growing, adapting. It's going to be rough in the early stages, and that continues. And again, this notion of a smaller scale where, the large, very large corporations that really have to amass intellectual property and patents to maintain their edge, perhaps the smaller scale entities don't have that same requirement. They can be more nimble, more agile in the marketplace. Second major bullet here is around collaborative networks, and I'm really excited about this space. So much of what I've learned about the sharing of ideas, the sharing of knowledge, collaboration in general, has come from a collaborative network. There's a couple of folks on the call today, I believe, who are part of that experience. I've been blogging heavily and tweeting for a good part of the last 5 years. Folks that might check will notice I've got about 30,000 tweets out there. I've been pretty prolific as a connector of dots and sharer of ideas. I don't think any of those tweets are reproduced or artificially generated. I can attest to that. But I will share that the ability to exchange ideas and exchange insights and really drive new thinking and new learning is very, very powerfully addressed in collaborative networks. So I can't say enough good things about that space, and we'll use those examples a bit later as we talk about how some of this works. And finally, toward a knowledge economy, we're getting into the notion of, can some of the things that are happening, in this future state model actually begin to pull in insights and ideas, redefine value. Perhaps it's not necessarily monetary. You don't necessarily pay for an idea or an insight, but you certainly can see value from these things. And as we create knowledge markets or knowledge economies, perhaps these insights can form a new currency and mechanisms to transact. Very, very early to be doing some of this from a execution perspective, and again, my goal today was to get you guys thinking, but the idea is that intellectual property has had a long history. The commons era is somewhat new. Let's look forward and say, where could this go? And that's really the intention for this notion of IP 3.0. Let me take a quick pause here. Are there any questions or anything that would want to come up? Marge, maybe you could poll the audience a bit. I've got a buzzer here that tells me when something's happening on the internet. I've had quite a few tweet notifications, so I think there's some good stuff happening on Twitter. I'm not watching that at the moment. But are there any questions, Marge, or anything that's come up so far?
Not at the moment.
Okay, very cool. We shall keep moving. Here's a picture for the IP 3.0 component, and one thing I really feel strongly about here is this notion that insights come into view. We talk about IP 3.0 and collaboration, and the reason for that is that mechanism of exchanging insights, which I map pretty cleanly in the social media space to Twitter, is where a lot of really powerful things can happen. Because those insights, if you remember when we had that earlier slide talk about insights being out of context, that's where kind of the careful listener or the person who's paying close attention might say, hey, this insight is useful to me in ways I might not have thought possible. And that context can be applied as an idea. So if you think about insight as the inception of a thought, very much like the movie, the idea kind of comes from that, and from those insights out of context, we can generate ideas. So that's why I think it's so important to look at the full life cycle of the idea, not just those things that we do in marketing, conference rooms where we do the ideation, and knowledge management where we inventory the ideas, and the patent office where we codify and restrict who can see it. But way upstream from all of that, we have the insights. So again, I really think there's value in taking that very, very upstream look at where those good ideas come from. And they come from our early insights, often shared out of context. So what are the overall trends? I use this slide to kind of pull together kind of that controlling phase. Historically, it's kind of a win-lose model, which is your basic commercial construct, competitive edge, baked into this notion of I have something you don't have and I will sell it at profit. And that's not a bad thing. That's our basic foundation of the Western economy. But as we move to more of a sharing model and a win-win model of risk-taking, where we start to shift our culture and our mindset into what else is possible, you start to open up and see some new ideas. And that's where, again, this collaboration concept, IP 3.0, really starts to change the rules. It does require new thinking. It requires cultures that are open to sharing and taking risks. And it does require trust. So we're transitioning now. In the next couple of slides, we'll talk through some of those elements, and we'll start to see how those components come together. Before we move off of this, though, I want to spend just a minute or two on the notion of competition, because it really is important to take with us this notion that the competition is always there and it's always important. I've captured here a slide from Michael Porter. Many of you guys are aware of his 5 forces model. It's been very well documented and held up as an example of how to show competitive forces. You see here threat of new entries, rivalry and competition, power of customers, power of suppliers. These are all very important elements in a competitive strategy for any company, really. And if you look at historically, and I just kind of put the 20th century around this, a lot of the advantage that companies held was by blocking out not just suppliers and competition competitors, but also customers to a large degree. And the corporation was essentially able to use patents to keep others out, and behind that brick wall, essentially you could keep your best ideas behind that wall, keep them safe, keep them protected. What I'll argue in the new economy and going forward in the 21st century, we can block everybody we want through the firewall, but what happens is they're talking to each other anyway, right? So your customers, you're talking to suppliers, talking to competitors. It's just a very open exchange of information, largely due to social media, but not only due to that, I mean, just based on internet connections and ability for folks to learn more on the internet. There's just a tremendous amount of information in the hands of customers and suppliers that was never there before. So yes, the patents are still important, and yes, firewalls are still doing the work that they do, but with those brick walls falling down, there really is not the ability for companies to stay behind that wall of safety where their ideas were once perhaps locked down in a safe place. So I wanted to kind of bring some notion of the markets are changing too. It's not just our notion of ideas. Okay, so as we jump into this next segment, I want to talk about the building blocks, and you'll notice kind of this DNA reference. Collaboration, DNA collaboration is the book I put out there a couple of years back, and a lot of the elements, in that work talk about culture and trust and intention. And what I want to do is bring forward some of those elements for today's discussion, because really to understand what this knowledge economy might be and how it might work, we really have to understand what needs to change. So the next couple of slides, I want to just talk through some of those elements and make sure we can get comfortable with notions of how this has to come together. First and foremost, and I've been very fascinated by the work of Charles Handy back in the 80s, talking about different kinds of culture. And he talks about 4 specific ones. This slide I adapted a bit from his analysis, but he walked through these 4 types, and I'll quickly touch on what these are. The first 2 are a command and control model, where you have a command culture, which is very, very centralized, very top-down. You have a functional-based culture, which often is linked to bureaucracy, so this is tied to standards and expertise, and it's very resource-intensive. Both of those are very healthy cultures. They're very strong. They can also limit ideas. The functional model in particular, because it is so much tied into kind of the standards and the accumulated expertise, often gets you into the silo thinking mode. So I'm always kind of nervous about that functional culture when it takes on, control or presence in a company, because it tends to lead to silo thinking. The third model, which I really like the best of all, of course, is the network model, which is geared for discovery. It's geared for learning. You might often see this in kind of a customer service function, where you basically have an open-ended cycle where there's information constantly coming in and you're learning from that. The fourth model is interesting, practitioner. It's very small and doesn't scale, but it is interesting. But I would like to kind of keep that network thinking for collaboration in mind, because that third model lends itself to the sharing of information, whereas the functional model or the silo model tends not to. So none of these are inherently good or bad, but when it comes to sharing and collaborating, that network model seems to give us the best chance for success. So just to recap some of those key points, the silo thinking is, in fact, one of our big challenges in the commercial space. The third bullet there is huge. This notion that our mental model is very much geared to notions of, top-down hierarchy, above my pay grade, the sound bites go on, that we just really can't act on our own. We have to get permission. And that's all important in many, many areas in many cases, but it does lead to calcification of knowledge exchange. It does shut down sharing, and it can hurt us if we're not careful. So we got to keep the silo model very, very much in our thoughts when we talk about, structure is not bad, but it can actually take over and be a negative. Trust is a huge topic. We could have a whole presentation just on that. I love Stephen M. R. Covey's discussion of this. It's a very rigorous approach to how we talk about trust in the market and in companies. I will not delve into too deeply here, although this notion of intent as one of his 4 pillars is absolutely huge, because part of the trust equation is what do we intend to do, and then do we have the integrity to deliver against that. So I focus on those quite a bit. We talk about, what are the elements needed for a healthy culture, and if you talk about a market where we're taking risks and where we're challenging our thinking about, control versus an open sharing perspective, we have to trust others at some level to at least exchange, make the contact, make the exchange, see what else might be possible to even have a chance. So I really feel like trust is an important element in this equation. We talk about intention a bit, and I use a kind of before and after view here to keep that silo thinking versus collaboration and focus. From a collaborative perspective, we have to be very, very crisp on what we intend to do. Who else needs to know what I'm working on? Does this need more clarity? I need to take ownership for this to be successful. What could we learn? These are things that a person who collaborates, will tend to say. They'll tend to, communicate these ideas to those around them. Whereas folks who are in this older model, silo thinking, information is hoarded. Don't ask, don't tell. Communicate through channels. I think most of us have lived and worked in those environments. It can be very frustrating at times. Again, it's not that silos are inherently structurally bad, but they do tend to take us away from that collaborative model. Another element here, and this is one that I've really done a lot of research on recently and writing more and more on this topic, is around structure versus flow. Again, one is not better than the other. Both are needed. Structure gives us guidance and focuses our efforts, so we've got to have that. But what we're really missing in the silo model and this kind of calcified model of the Western world is this notion that flow is not part of the equation. And I'd argue here that flow is actually a very critical element from taking things that are learned, things that are coming in new, and providing a means of adding additional insight, additional context to the equation so that we can actually move toward a much more flexible, adaptive, and non-restrictive mode of operating. And for emergence to take place, for new things to happen, for innovation to occur, we've got to have the ability to flow in our learning process and our evaluation of options. So we need structure to start. We need structure at the end to kind of harvest the fruit, so to speak. Kurt Lewin had done a lot of work on this topic of action research back in the 40s. Start with structure, you unfreeze it, you do the change and refreeze. That action research model is very closely aligned with what we're thinking here about structure and flow working together. So a couple of quick examples. I've got a process flow here which shows a little bit of a loop. Most of us, I've got a technology background, most of us think about process as a very structured thing, and a good process model definitely accounts for start and end and so forth. What we show in the middle of this process flow is a very open loop, and this basically says here at step 3, set and hold context. Let's talk about something specific, but then as we brainstorm and dialogue around what some of those inputs are, we identify patterns, we can go back and revisit the context. The context may change. So what's happening in this kind of collaborative model is that we have loopback mechanisms that let us alter the context in real time. Very, very powerful for emergence. Also very hard to do, because if you're in a group and you have goals and you have lots of different strong opinions, the ability to kind of change context as well as to hold it in real time is not easy. And it's very difficult to pull off a very, very collaborative model. So what this flow talks about is how can you establish a little bit of flexibility to handle changes in context in real time. And I think this is a very important part of how knowledge works and flows. Another key aspect here, which I've had tremendous amount of traction on as we've had discussions around this, is the notion of diverse roles in collaboration process. These are several that I've found in my work and my engagement, and both project teams as well as online chat interactions. Everybody brings different roles to the table. Some folks can wear different hats. You can definitely have situations where one person might be a planner and a moderator. Others are exclusively wearing the hat of a connector or a catalyst. And the idea here is not so much, what is each discrete role doing? It's that everybody participates. The roles can change during the course of a conversation or over the venue. But what's very, very important is that we're creating common ground as we look at how these roles contribute, and as we look at how those roles interact in the process. Some of the roles are front-end based, and they help us kind of frame the topic, frame the ideas, frame the collaboration. You've got roles like the catalyst, the analyst, the designer, who are doing that work real time during the conversation, during the research, during that analysis. And then one very, very important role that's almost always neglected is the synthesis stage, where we aggregate, we take away. I've been in countless meetings, I'm sure a lot of folks on the call have over the careers, over the years, where a lot of conversation takes place and nothing comes out of it. And even when the actions might not be clear, even the good progress, the stakes in the ground, if you will, are not captured. So I've become a huge advocate for aggregation. It's an area where in social media and Twitter chats and the like, there's still a tremendous amount to be done, because so often the ideas are exchanged and the insights are generated, the aha moments are taking place, and we just don't do a good job of aggregating. So that's an area for improvement for sure as we look at collaboration. But as I talk about these models, I wanted to come back to that structure and flow, because the structure on the front end is, what is our frame? You guys saw me at the start of the webinar today share a blog post, and we got that blog up about a week ago and then tweeted that out, and several folks took a look at it and read it. So we create that structure on the front end. We're creating, in this situation with a dialogue, more of a flow. We establish some context, introduce some ideas, identify things that resonate, and hopefully we learn from that. We gain some insight and some value from that learning, and then at the end we put that structure back, and we put some stakes in the ground and move on. So there's definitely a balance even here of structure and flow. If we go back to our kind of three-tier model of insights, ideas, and solutions, even there is in fact structure and flow. Structure in the collaboration, we're going to bring some structure to how we interact, but how those insights turn into ideas, those ideas turn into solutions, well, that's a flow, that's a process, it's a loop, and there's no set way to accomplish that. Everybody has models and ideas as to how to do it. There are whole companies that do innovation, counseling, and strategizing, and those are all good things, but behind the scenes there is a flow to how that insight turns into an idea, and the idea turns into a solution. So clearly these forces are kind of at work behind the scenes. The goal here is to bring those out and get some visibility. Okay, what I want to do, I've got about 10 minutes left of scheduled time. I want to make sure we get a little bit on knowledge management, and then we'll kind of wrap up kind of the package material and give the group a chance to discuss, because again, I really want to make sure we have a chance to talk through some of this. Knowledge management, as I said early on, is a business practice really associated around determining what the primary sources of knowledge are inside of a company, trying to create some structure and some tracking for that information, accumulate that content, essentially disseminate. And a big key word in the knowledge management space is reuse. Let's not generate knowledge over and over and repeat cycles. Maybe we can work smarter. This birds of a feather meme within KM is very common, where we get all the PMs together, all the project managers, we'll put all the engineers together, get them talking, with the goal of trying to get more and more insight codified and recorded, so everything's not stuck in people's heads. Well, the problem is that kind of perpetuates a silo model, because as long as you're doing birds of a feather, you really are staying inside of silos. I firmly believe, and I blogged on this as well, that KM has got to evolve. It's got to be much more bottom-up in nature, much more cross-functional. We really want to guard against silo thinking in every case if possible, and really look outside the company too, not just internally, to what's happening in the industry. I know from a competitive intelligence perspective in library sciences, a big part of what those organizations do is to bring that outside information inside, and how can that be leveraged. But it's really, to me, about generating new ideas and not just cataloging the old ones. So I really feel like KM is going to change. There's a paper that I participated in a couple years back. Cyber has a white paper out there which really covers this at a pretty comprehensive level. I like to pull back to this analysis because if you look at traditional KM, which is very top-down and very structured, and you remember this notion of structure versus flow, if you look at what's happening on the outside of KM with social networks, much more bottom-up, user-driven, opportunity-driven, coming from the day-to-day. And this paper kind of outlines this convergence zone where knowledge management and social networks kind of come together as knowledge networks. Very consistent with the previous material. It's just a different kind of way to slice it. This perhaps is more of a commercial view, but I really felt like this was a good way to show how that top-down and the bottom-up can kind of work together. And this convergence zone really speaks to how do we evolve, where do we go from here and how does this go forward. So I wanted to make sure that you guys could see this in context with commercial discussion and perhaps come back to that as well. And finally, the solution language, kind of wrap things up and bring it together. As I said early on, solution language to me is very much about visualizing the change. If you have any change management background at all, you guys saw a quick reference to Cotter in the slides earlier. I'm a big John Cotter fan. But essentially, one of the primary steps in any change effort is to articulate very clearly what change is required. And to me, solution language is a concept that lets us do that. It lets us basically paint our ideas onto the future landscape, define the solution in terms that really convey what we're trying to achieve. So the intent of our design, the intent of our effort, the reason we're collaborating is very clearly communicated. In doing that, we engage new stakeholders, we create some common ground and some goodwill. So it's way beyond just a charter or a scope statement, because the folks in the commercial space and project managers like myself will often say, well, we've got to start with a charter and we've got to start with a scope statement. And that is often very true. We want to do that. But in a collaborative space, it's much more open-ended. So that charter or that scope statement is broader. It has hinges. It has the ability for evolution and change over time. And again, structure is not bad. Scope statements aren't bad, but they do tend to lock us in. This collaborative space, we're going to be much broader in our thinking. So I've got this slide here to kind of wrap up the discussion and kind of put a wrapper around what we've talked about so far. We talk about collaborative building blocks in our solution language. There are more than the ones that we've talked about. I've kind of highlighted, trust. We talked about culture a bit. But as you can see here, there's quite a few topics that are way beyond the scope of today's discussion. This is just too much here. But if you start to list out and inventory all the things that might be important in a collaborative economy or knowledge economy, you get into notions of empathy, the ability to listen and pay attention. You get into notions of scaffolding and having temporary structures to wrap around our ideas as we develop them. Visual metaphor, a very powerful way to kind of see what we're talking about. So all of these pieces, critical thinking is another one I'm very huge on and blog about extensively, because at the end of the day, all of these elements speak to how do we come to the table, how do we work together, how do we articulate our ideas in a kind of a structured yet flexible way. I love the metaphor of scaffolding because it kind of speaks to that. We bring diverse roles to the table that let us adapt and change, and we've got to keep a notion that structure and flow are both very important. We can't do one or the other exclusively. We won't be successful. As I kind of put a point on this and drew to some conclusions here, one notion that I had is maybe the notion of intellectual property itself has some constraint. And I think intellectual capital might be even a better way to describe this notion of IP because it speaks to assets. It speaks to things that can be transformative. An asset basically helps you extract value from your organization, your company in a useful way. Property basically, sits in the vault. Property is something you own. You have it. You have a right to it. You can extract money for it. Capital has got much more of a notion of growth and opportunity and something that can add value. So intellectual capital at the end of the day may be a stronger overall frame. So with this last slide, I've given you guys back 2 minutes, so I can promise 20, so we've got plenty of time for conversation. What I've done here is I've captured a couple of the key ideas, to me kind of the biggest ideas in the deck, if you will. I may have missed it. I may have missed some things that are important to you guys, so I don't want to lock in on these ideas. But for me, the ones that I think have the most application after today as we go forward, we started out with this notion of IP, intellectual property, evolving. To me, IP 3.0 is really about collaboration. It's this knowledge-sharing economy, and maybe we should frame it as something besides IP. Maybe it's intellectual capital. Number two, structure and flow. Very, very important to be adaptive or to enable adaptation. Very important for emergent collaborative efforts. Solution language, we talked about how to describe all this and wrap some new thinking into it. KM futures, and of course anything else we've touched on is absolutely fair game. So as we open up for questions, I just want to challenge you guys in two ways. Number one, how could we apply some of these ideas, or how can we make some of these ideas better? And happy to talk about next steps. So Marge, if we could, I'll take any questions from the group.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, here's the first question. How do you think we should quantify, if we should, IP as a trade-off between competing interests of owner and competitor plus society as a stakeholder?
Wow. That's huge. And I tell you what, as soon as you bring society into this thing, it is absolutely a different conversation, because social change and the whole nonprofit space absolutely can take advantage of these ideas. And it almost begs the question, you know, we have a commercial discussion, because when I think about IP, I quickly think of IP attorneys and locking down information and patents and so forth, and it's all very important in many industries. I'm not trying to minimize it, but when you take that discussion and hold it up next to social change and social good and all the important things that can happen there, it's difficult to have that conversation, you know, without it being hard to control the context, if you will. I've been in many conversations where we've attempted to do exactly that, and it's very, very challenging. It's also exciting, because when you look at commercial constructs and social constructs side by side, remember that process of creative thinking where we kind of had this idea next to design in the box? Having those two notions side by side really challenges your thinking on what we're even talking about. So I would say, you know, IP has a very commercial construct to it, very historical. It may very well go forward and be bigger and better, but I think in the social context you get much more into this ecosystem view. And by the way, it's not just change in third world. I mean, social change can be education, it can be healthcare, it can be environmental sustainability. A lot of things happening in the social space that are very close to home. So I think that question is broad enough to be difficult to answer quickly, but I think it's a great one. What I'd like to do is maybe put a point on that question and that answer and circle back. I don't want to leave anything hanging there, but at the same time, it's a little broad for me to get a real crisp answer to.
Okay, here's another one. Given your slide around invention, idea, and insight, does it make sense that CI and KM should be keen to work more collaboratively with R&D and product development, etc., or is this happening already?
Well, that's absolutely huge, Marge, and yes, I have seen it happen. There won't be time today to go through examples and case studies, but where we've seen R&D embrace KM, and I do think library sciences and competitive intelligence is absolutely in the middle of this discussion, because that's where it can happen. Knowledge management really is designed to make companies smarter. That white paper from Cyber that I referenced, Getting Smarter Faster, is really about that. It's how do we bring, you know, insight and ideas into the company to drive greater value. A lot of CEOs and executives view that capital acquisition process is hiring smart people, and that is a big part of it. You've got to hire the smart people, but at the end of the day, there's a soundbite. I don't remember the author of this comment was, you know, the smartest people don't work for you. You know, they work for somebody else, and that's absolutely just the sheer, you know, scale of industry and economies, you know, dictate that. So I absolutely think when you get KM and CI and in R&D working together, good things happen. So often I see R&D being its own silo. So often I see KM being its own silo. Even though it's kind of designed to work against silos, KM can become a silo. So I do think that's a huge, huge piece, and I think we could circle back to that and talk about case studies perhaps in the future.
Okay, and related to that, why is it that CI and KM are not more joined at the hip given the power they could produce related to insights, or are they?
Right, and I think that's exactly my point, is that they tend to be silos. They tend to be very much, paying attention to boundaries and hierarchies, and it just, really defeats the purpose when you have all these smart people trying to get more knowledge to flow in the company, and you right away create boundaries and scope statements and ROI expectations that are just very difficult to call to allow progress,
If it is well known that silos are a barrier to collaboration, why and how do you think that organizations create silos?
Well, I think there's been a lot written on this, and a lot of my research takes me back to these themes. And folks that have a similar view as myself are very, very vocal on some of the forces and causes. Frederick Taylor, who had done a lot on management science and was very instrumental in the factory model, if you will, has revolutionized industry and driven a huge amount of quality of life for the Western world. But at the same time, we've embraced this mindset of assembly line, and defects are a bad thing, and faster is better, and efficiency is key. So you get all these. You just imagine the factory floor and all the efficiencies that have to happen, and to make the most possible profit off of your assembly line, you've got to pay attention to those things, and those are all important. But if you begin to think that's the way everything works, you begin to think in silos, you think in controls, you think in boundaries and limits and hierarchies, and your mindset is essentially locked into this kind of silo model. Sir Ken Robinson has written very extensively in the education space, I think Clayton Christensen as well, on topics related to kind of silo thinking, where we treat education as an assembly line. And we lock in on things like the Common Core, right? And everything has a standard and a rule, and everything is fixed. When in fact, children, come to the table with different learning styles and different needs, and most teachers know that. But then you get these kind of hierarchical, structures, handed to them, say, here's how you have to teach, here's how we're going to grade everybody, and next thing you know, you've got this structured model sitting on top of a lot of diverse learning styles. So this is being hotly debated in education. It's a good example where silo thinking can bring a certain set of assumptions to the solution, when in fact, if you look at a much more open-ended view, which I feel like most teachers do, right, you can see the conflict in play, and it becomes a very hotly debated topic. So I just think that silo thinking is very pervasive. We could have a whole breakout just on that and have lots to talk about.
Our CI division has seen collaboration as a major theme of our webinars this year. Why has it taken so long for this concept of collaboration to come to the forefront? It seems so basic and common sense.
It truly does, Mars, and I tell you, that's what caused me to write the book, because I was very, very intrigued, but also very frustrated. The first book that I read on the topic that didn't talk about collaboration specifically, it was more about change, was Rosabeth Moss Cantor back in the 80s, Change Masters, and it talked about how power flows in organizations, and how collaboration. I'm sure it's referenced in there way before it became kind of in vogue, but it was talked about a bit. And I was very intrigued that, just as you said, as the person asked, it's so intuitive. In my work, I call it smart people behaving badly, right? It's very intuitive how it should work, and yet in a siloed environment where there's a tremendous amount of hierarchy and structure and process, it's very difficult for collaborative initiatives to take hold. And I've personally experienced this in my career, where you have great ideas, great concepts, great material, great support, and you head down this path, and 6 to 9 months in, it gets cut, it gets taken apart, and the budget goes away, and all that good work is lost. And it's very frustrating, but I do think if you take a holistic view and you look at these building blocks, and frankly, all the building blocks that we talked about, intent and trust, and language, metaphor, communication, the long, long list of things. We've got to get good at most or all of those things, or I should say somebody on the team has to get good at most or all of those things for us to be successful, because if we let any of those gaps stay open, if there is not trust, if we don't have good intention, communicated, if we don't have good communication, then all of our intuitive notions of how we should behave just don't go to that next level. And that's why I think there's this need for building blocks and solution language, to me, is really how you attack that, to kind of drive that mindset change.
Okay, and then here's a different question. Anything about the perceived risk about China and India ripping off IP with impunity?
Well, that's certainly an interesting question. I have some perspectives there. I can share from what I've learned on the topic that intellectual property is not well defined in other countries. And certainly as you look at the global expansion both for manufacturing and IT, certainly a big issue in outsourcing discussions. That's where most of my insight has been gained over the last 10, 15 years. And I've been pretty involved in the outsourcing space, both as a customer of and as a practitioner of various companies. And IP is a hot topic in outsourcing because what we think of and know about as IT in Europe and in the U.S., I won't even say Western, I'll just say Europe and U.S. because that's where these IP laws have come from. We get very used to that as a normal thing, and we just assume that everybody else in the world has intellectual property rules too. The fact is they don't. So I don't want to key in on China or India, but I do know that the countries outside of Europe and the U.S. have, in many cases, very different views of what intellectual property is. And as Jefferson said, it's a right that is bestowed by society. And in the current current world, there's many societies with different views of what that means. So if you're outsourcing, well, certainly it's an important topic. If you're doing business in other countries besides the U.S. and Europe, big discussion. Right or wrong, well, who knows, right? This is a discussion what needs to change and how it might change. It's an excellent question. It's, again, a good topic for more discussion.
And then protection of IP is expensive for SMBs all around the world. Violation by global corporations is debilitating. What can communities do to level the playing field and bring these Goliaths to their knees?
Well, again, there's some I probably wouldn't have gone to that last statement about bringing folks to their knees because I'm all about making things better and faster and smarter. I do think that as we look at commons, the Creative Commons collaborative mode of doing work, it shifts the rules for those who are able to or choose to play in it. If you look at the larger corporations that have benefited from patents, whatever the industry, whether it's manufacturing or pharma, you can kind of go down the list of the big players, and huge value has been derived from investment in that approach, but it does create kind of a have and have not endpoint. If we can look at sharing as a way to get more of the small to medium-sized entities, companies, individuals, consortiums, to be able to play. And if you talk to, listen to Clay Christensen, read some of his work about disruptive innovation, he'll say that innovation typically takes place on the fringes or on the edges where things are less defined, maybe a little bit less structured. And I think in this case that's exactly the right approach where you get into discussions around new markets, new capabilities. What if we solve a problem in a different way than having everybody owns a patent, kind of rush to the patent office. So I think it's not so much about tearing down the big guys, although some folks probably have that view. I do think it's more about what can we build in a skunkworks or an R&D fashion that has enough staying power and enough value and enough long-term benefit to the stakeholders that it will flourish and grow. And it's hard work. I mean, it's innovation is not easy. If it was, everybody would do it, right? So collaboration gets you to the point where you can begin to put foundations in that will stay. You can begin to create value for broader and broader groups of stakeholders. And again, I'll say it again, I don't think it's about tearing down the big guys. I think it's about building up new capabilities and letting those grow and flourish on their own merits.
Okay, thank you. And then this last one is, how do we go about doing a better job regarding aggregation?
Aggregation, I tell you, that's another one that's just so darn intuitive, and I think all of us have taken turns putting on that hat, taking notes, writing down, capturing action items. Just as recently as last week, I'm developing parking lot items for a meeting where I attended that lasted for 5 days, and it is really important to do a good job with that. I think the reason that it is often neglected is it's tedious. It can appear to be busy work, and yet so much of the value of capturing what has happened in that collaborative process will show up in those action items because that's where you can begin to harvest and pull away those takeaways. And social media, I think that's where it's probably the most egregious, because there's this notion, we didn't discuss it much today, around Twitter chats, where I've gotten a huge amount of personal benefit learning, not in terms of just of insight, but also colleagues, very close friends, some of whom are on this call, that I basically have not met in person, but I have learned from them and they've learned from me, and we begin to exchange, very much like Jefferson's candle metaphor, where you begin to just get huge amounts of value through the discussion process, and even then we tend not to write down what we came up with. So we do the blog frame. We'll typically go to a blog site, and as I did in the beginning of this deck, let's write down some ideas, publish some thoughts, put them out there, tweet about those ideas, get some conversation going. We come together for a Twitter chat, and the way Twitter chat works is you get 10, 15, 20, 25 people, sometimes more, together for an hour, and you compare notes. And it's really powerful, it's really exciting, there's a lot of great exchange, and everybody goes home, and it's over. And transcripts are a good start, and my good friend John Lewis, I think he's on the call as well, has helped us with some of these Twitter chats to establish takeaways. Let's create a PDF of all the things that were shared, and we'll publish that. Perhaps John and I can publish some tweets that came out of today with the hashtag IP30 or the hashtag SLACID. But the transcripts themselves, are a record, but are they, a useful, living kind of, input to the next conversation? And the answer is they are if you make them that, and they are if you take the time. But even folks, I put myself on the list, who are very intrigued by and interested in driving these kinds of discussions, where's the time to go back and harvest that information for the next one? So I would say the challenge is that it's tedious, it's time-consuming, it's a lot of work. The value is huge, but I really feel like it's an area for improvement, not just in the social space, but when we collaborate in general. We've got to do the hard work of taking away what we learned, bringing that back into input in the next cycle, and that's part of that iterative process we looked at a couple slides back.
Okay, well, that's all the questions we have. Did you have any final comments?
Guys, I hope it comes through. I hope it comes through that I'm very passionate about this stuff. I've been researching and learning about collaboration for, like I said, 25, 30 years. The first time I picked up Cantor's book on change, 1988, I think it was, I first read it. I've been intrigued by the space, and starting about 5 years ago, I really began to read more. In fact, the very last slide here is a resource slide. A couple of books here that I've read that I think are extremely important. Peter Senge, of course, Fifth Discipline. Margaret Wheatley is a huge voice in organization change. Daniel Goleman is very, very strong. He's the guy kind of behind EQ. Talks a lot about empathy and learning and different styles of communication. And then as you look towards the last couple of years, there's been kind of a bunching up of relevant topics. So I really feel like, from Tapscott to Covey, John Hagel, all of these authors, Stephen Johnson in particular, has written very heavily on this topic of where good ideas come from. So some of his writing a couple of years back was very inspirational to topics from today. But the long story short is that there's been a lot of discussion, there's been a lot of good ideas shared towards this end. What we really haven't done a good job of, in my view, is to pull it together, to tie it together, and to work from it. So one thing I always like to do, and this is my very last slide, is really this notion that we can, as collaborators, as colleagues, drive to a different place. We've got to, my friend Wittgenstein said, some decades ago, put those question marks deeper down. Let's ask better questions. Let's not just ask the easy questions. Let's ask the hard ones. And we do that with exchange. We do it through webinars like this one. We do it on Twitter. We do it through blogging. There's lots of ways to get those ideas exchanged, but I really would encourage folks to take some personal ownership for this and look for ways to drive that collaborative behavior and that bias for knowledge sharing into the day-to-day discussion. If folks are able to do that, then some of the things we talked about today become possible. And quite frankly, it's a very exciting space, and hopefully we can continue to explore it and push forward.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris, for this presentation. Thank you again to Aurora WDC for sponsoring this webinar. Everybody, be sure to check our next webinar in January. Our schedule will be posted soon on the SLACID website, and thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks, Marsh. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.